Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Ghoulfriend Hour. I'm your host, your ghost host, Morgan Feza, and welcome back to another exciting season. We have a really awesome guest today to kick off season 3. So if you are new here, welcome to the Ghoulfriend Hour, and if you have been a listener, thank you so much for carrying us for our 3rd season, and welcome back. So I'm going to turn the mic over as we introduce Miss Megan Mary, and we're going to get into some exciting stuff today.
Hello, I am Megan Mary, and I am an award-winning international best-selling metaphysical author of the fiction trilogy Witches of Maple Hollow. I am also a dream worker, host of Women's Dream Enlightenment podcast, and founder of Inner Realms Publishing. I have my master's in English, and I'm pursuing my PhD in metaphysical sciences.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing. And kudos on all of those accomplishments. That is so awesome. I had so many questions. I tried not to research too much into you because I try and leave some mystery to our conversation because I also want to learn about you directly from the source. And so I had a ton of questions. When you said you were a dream analyst, like I was what does that mean, and like what really leads you into that line of work? Because I feel like everyone that I've talked to kind of in the metaphysical realm, the paranormal, we've had so many guests on this show, they all have a really cool story about how they kind of ended up in their niche. So I'd love to kind of start from the beginning. Were you always a spiritual person, and how did you end up here?
I would say I've always been very interested in all things metaphysical, esoteric, unseen, mysteries of the world, right? I've always been intrigued by those things. Even when I was younger, I, you know, just believed in a lot of things that children believe in that you're later told as an adult, no, that's not real. And you have to let go of that as an adult because we don't have any proof of that. So that's not real. And I think that's how a lot of people look at the spiritual realm and look at dreams. And so I was always very interested in them. When I was a teenager, I bought a book on lucid dreaming and I wanted to figure out how to do it, which I did. And then I would say as I got a bit older, I started ignoring them. And it wasn't until I got very sick with a bunch of different chronic illnesses that I had to do some real inner healing. I was starting to do a lot of spiritual work, shadow work, inner work, and started to pay attention to the dreams. And when I started to pay attention, they came back full force and they had a lot of messages for me. And I started receiving a lot of information that I was supposed to be doing that out in the world, and that I was supposed to start a podcast and I was supposed to write books, and all of this I was not ready for. So I had to do more work to get ready to do that, to be willing to be visible and out in the world. But in doing that, I started recognizing the importance of dreams and how I really do feel they are our doorway to the spiritual realm, and that they are our spirit selves, the other half of our existence while we are here. And so it really became important for me to spread that word and to help people gain appreciation for them and how much they can help us in our lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've heard so many just mixed things about dreams, and I've always been one where I've had, you had those moments where you get the kind of brain diarrhea, like you're riding a T-Rex through Walmart and you're like, okay, that there was really maybe nothing behind that, and I just kind of write it off as like
You're
my
wrong.
brain's purging.
Yeah, but you're
But there
wrong.
are like yeah. There are like these dreams though that I talk to my husband about this quite often. As a sensitive, I have had dreams though, and it's very I almost want to say visceral maybe is the right word. It's
Mhm.
very like it feels real. I have a lot of consciousness in it, if that kind of makes sense. And so there's such a stark difference between the two dreams. And like, you just know when it starts to kind of make you question, like, was that a dream, or was I kind of channeling, or was I, you know, I would love to kind of chat with you about the different, what you have learned in your journey of what's what, I guess. What is, I'm sure there's, maybe not to make it too complicated, but layers and levels to this, I would assume, in a metaphysical sense. There's probably your like messages and visits. And so I would love to kind of get into that and pick apart what you've learned and what you've experienced.
Yes. So I am a very big fan of the liminal spaces between waking and sleeping, particularly the one where in between sleeping and waking. So they call that the hypnopompic state, the one where you're just waking up. For me, that's the state where I receive a lot of information. I'll get people's names and songs playing. I'll hear song lyrics. I'll get full on messages that I'll write down that at the time I'm not even really awake enough to understand what they mean.
Yeah.
And for me, those are really important. Those are really telling. And yes, I definitely think that the song lyrics are, clairaudience, because the lyrics themselves have a message, right? And so even if I don't like that song, I know the lyrics and it's trying to communicate to me with those lyrics. So there's a lot of that going on for me. But I guess the bigger question is, yeah, there's so many layers of consciousness, right? Because we are transitioning brainwave states when we're falling asleep. And even while we are asleep, we're going through all these different stages of REM and so forth. And so our dreams will change throughout the night. When we have dreams early in the night, they tend to be more regurgitations of the day, but that doesn't mean they don't hold meaning. And then as the night goes on, we have longer and more epic and more complex dreams. But I feel that all of them hold a meaning. And so I devised a method basically that helps people understand how to decode them. And for me, it doesn't impose a meaning on them because I feel that everybody's meanings are intrinsic to them. So everybody has a different life experience. So that dream, if we both had it, is going to mean something different, right? To
Yeah.
each one of us. And so I try to help people mind their subconscious and understand what the symbols in the dreams mean, get them to question it, right? So
Yeah.
it's more like I'm mentoring or I'm consulting with them because they hold the answers. So
Absolutely. It kind of reminds me, I mean, I guess in a way it really is, it's like a form of mediumship, because I know like when I'm channeling or I'm picking things up, like I always compare it to, um it's kind of silly, and I'm not sure if you've heard of this, but people will be like, okay, when you think of a subject, what color do you think of? And a lot of people will be like, oh, well, when I see math, I think red. And so it's like you have these little connections. So I love that you've kind of pointed out, something that I always kind of say to my friends, and I never really know how to explain it, but when you see certain things, it to you it means something different. I think everybody has their own little like dictionary of like, okay, when I see blue, this is what I think of, or when I see clouds or I see rain, like this signifies this. So I love that you've touched upon that.
yeah, when I was learning math in elementary school, the room was painted red. So I associate math with red. But there is something about color theory when it comes to dreams that I do incorporate into my work. And it really asks people to look at the different colors that are present in their dreams. We also look at the weather, what clothing you're wearing, the setting, what's the landscape, all of those types of things. can play a part and hold meaning.
That's very interesting. So, I guess like what happens in a dream session? Like what is the process there? And I guess like in a dream session, what are some of the crazier experiences that maybe you've had with either like if you can share that with some of your clients, like some experiences that have taken place?
Yeah, so in a dream session, I have whoever I'm working with bring their record of their dream and in
Okay.
as much detail as possible. And we go over first, we look at what the mood is. So the 4 steps of my dream mirror method are memory, mood, mirror, and message. So the memory is getting that dream recall going, making sure that you're recording your dreams on a regular basis, having that dream record. The next step is the mood, because we want to look at what was the like visceral, like you said, experience,
Okay.
because dreams can be very emotionally driven. So, what was the overwhelming feeling of that dream, or did it change? And how did you feel when you went to sleep? And how did you feel when you woke up?
Hmm.
And next, we look at the mirror stages, where we look at all those little details: the people, the places, the actions, the weather, the landscape, the colors, the numbers, the songs, all of those things. And I ask the person, well, what does an owl represent to you? What does a snake represent to you? Because maybe they had a pet snake, maybe their brother had a pet snake, maybe they're scared of snakes, maybe they're not. So I don't want to use a dream dictionary interpretation and say, well, snakes always mean this.
Yeah.
I want them to pull out what it means for them.
Okay.
And in that process, then we start to say, okay, what are all of these things telling us? What is the progression of the story? And look at the dream as a story. And what is it telling us? Is there a message? Is there an opportunity? How is it a metaphor for your life? And it really allows the clients to take the dreams and look at them through a different lens, particularly if they are nightmares. On my podcast, I have women come on and share their dreams, and one of them was a nightmare that was obviously very upsetting. But when we started to use this method, she started to look at the dream in a very different way and realized that some of the people that appeared in the dream were helpers, and that she actually got out of the situation that was upsetting, and that things changed in the dream that were a good indicator of where she's going in her life. And so we also have the opportunity to restory those stories. So if it ends on a bad note and you don't want to think about that dream, and you don't want that dream to reoccur, then we present, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure. Okay, how would you like that dream to go if you could have controlled it? If you could choose a different ending, what would it be? And I walk the client through with a meditation, visualization of, okay, let's put you back in that spot, but then let's have it end a different way.
That's
And
really
that
interesting.
can be really powerful, because you're giving that suggestion to your subconscious, and that
Yeah.
can really alter the course of recurring dreams.
Yeah, it's reclaiming your power definitely too, because I
Mhm.
feel like dreams, I know like I've talked about this on the podcast, but I my personal experience with nightmares, I tend to have, like I said, those brain diarrhea dreams, but I typically think I have pretty pleasant dreams, and there's only been about probably 3 or 4 that, like, were very visceral, but, like, very scary, and so I kind of was glad that you touched upon nightmares, because 'cause I'm curious, do you think in a spiritual sense that sometimes like, have you connected with, we'll just call them beings for now, whatever you believe them to be, have you connected with beings? What do you think those beings are? And then do you think that sometimes people who are sensitive or more prone to the spiritual realm can be particularly vulnerable in dream state?
The first part of your question, yes, I've encountered all sorts of different, right, life forms, animals, spirit guides, other people, all of that. And I think that we're spirits first and humans second. And I think that everyone is spirit before and after and during. And so when we're sleeping, we go back to that spiritual state and we go to a different level of existence, a different realm where other people are there as well. And those people might be sleeping or they might have been passed on or they might, that's where all the different dimensions can exist. And so that was the first to answer the first part of your question. What was the second part again?
So, do you think, what I had kind of, I guess, just in my particular situation, just going off my experience, the nightmares that I've had, the beings that have been in those nightmares, like I could very clearly identify who and what they were and what my, I guess, how my spirit recognized what they were. And so my question is, with some of these maybe lower vibrational things or things that we perceived to be lower vibrational, do are they technically bad? And then also when we're
Yeah.
like in a dream state, um like, are we vulnerable? Like, is that
All right.
something, do you have like things that maybe either bedtime routine rituals that maybe you do that kind of just prepare your soul for that, vulnerability, and maybe things to keep yourself safe? Because I think there's so much, one thing we talk about a lot on the podcast is media misconceptions. So there's a lot of, you see movies like Inception or Insidious, and you see all these crazy Hollywood media or people kind of on TikTok that maybe aren't as educated in this field, that kind of, there's some fear mongering, and then there's just some miseducation that they mean well, but there's, they think that they know what they're talking about, and it gives a lot of misinformation. So I always like to know, since you are wise and you have that experience, like, what is the vulnerability level? How do you kind of protect yourself in that state? And what's kind of fact versus fiction?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I understand what you're saying, and I think the vulnerability level is, when I had a dream about the Grim Reaper once. Was it the
Mhm.
Grim Reaper? No, I don't think so. I think it was a manifestation of fear.
Okay.
But what happened at the time was that I recognized I was dreaming
Okay.
and I essentially destroyed him. And so that's why I call it dream empowerment, because when you start to recognize that you're the creator of your dream space, just like you're the creator of your own reality, then everything that you encounter or that you perceive gets perceived differently,
Okay.
because you're no longer thinking, oh, am I vulnerable, or am I, it's more that you have the ability to alter your perception, to alter your reality. And so I think we get stuck a lot in victimhood, and victimhood is perceiving that reality is happening to you, that you're not actually create part of the creation of what you perceive as reality. And all of reality is just perception anyway. We're filtering it all out. That's one of the biggest things that I talk about in my books, is the illusion of reality, because reality, a lot of people think, well, you got to see the reality of the situation. Like there's just one truth and everyone has to wake up to it. That's not how this universe works. We all have our own truth because we are all perceiving in the matrix. So it gets very esoteric when you start understanding from a quantum perspective, and then you can't put that label of vulnerable or victim on it, because different things are happening in that space and
Yeah.
you are controlling that space whether you know it or not. So um I think that there are things, of course, there's lower realm vibrations, there's lower realm energies. And when we wake up with what I call a dream hangover, we have that low energy. All of a sudden, we are carrying that low energy. And whether it came from outside of us or not, because we're all connected, we still are carrying that then. And so it's our job to do that energy work to transmute and move out that negative energy and bring in more higher energy. And so that's the work that we're doing when we're looking at that dream and we're working through it and we're healing ourselves while we're doing it.
Absolutely. That's awesome. I love everything that you're saying because I just really love the empowerment behind what you're teaching because I think you're 100% right. I think we, especially nowadays, that victimhood that you kind of talked about is so prevalent, and it's something that I wish that more people would kind of open their eyes and see how often we kind of victimize ourselves and don't give ourselves enough credit to be strong enough to overcome and to really like fight those fears and fight, um those lower vibrational energies, and we just kind of think like, well, there's nothing I can do about it, and it's like that's not true. So being able to kind of own that and that accountability is so needed. So I kind of want to touch upon I guess I'm trying to think of how to word this. um can you give me one experience that you have experienced in your dream world, that was really profound to you, and kind of describe it? I just think listeners love to hear firsthand experiences. So as best as you can paint a picture, tell us about one of your most profound dream experiences and what that kind of meant to you.
Yeah, there's so many, but a lot of them I chose to put in my books, even though my books are fiction. A lot of the dreams are not because reality is stranger than fiction sometimes. And one of really the dream that inspired the whole trilogy was a very vivid dream that I had about a talking cat. And he had a lisp, and he told me his name was Wixby. And I was like,
I
okay,
love it.
I can't just let this go. And I didn't know what to do with it. I really hadn't done creative writing, even though I have my degree in English. It was more philosophical, analytical, Shakespeare and British literature and stuff like that. And so I was like, I think I need to write a little story about this guy, but I don't know. And so I started writing just a little short story. I thought maybe it was going to be a children's story because he just seemed so whimsical and fun to me. But then I stopped writing it, and I didn't forget about it, but I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I'm not a writer. That was fun, but I got to move on. And so I left it for like 10 years until
Wow.
I had that experience where everything was kind of shifting and dark night of the soul and all this stuff. And I was started to do all this healing. And then I started, I think I should return to that story. And so I started to write the story again, but I brought dreams into it. And all of a sudden, the whole thing became, the first book, which is The Dream Haunters. So that just took off as soon
I
as
love
I
the cover. I love the
started doing it.
art. I think it's so awesome.
Thank you. So, I mean, that's what was the catalyst for the whole trilogy, was that dream about Wixby.
I love that name, Wixby. I just think that's so awesome. Now that you like, are you working on anything new? Any new books? Can you give us some insight into that?
I'm going to be writing a nonfiction book next on dreams. And so, as part of my metaphysical studies, that was what was supposed to come out first. And then Spirit said, no, you're writing these first. And so I wrote these, but now I'm like, okay, now can we do the nonfiction book? Because I already know what it's going to be named. It's already hidden in the trilogy. And so that's going to be next. I won't say that I'm not going to write fiction again. I just published all 3 of these within 365 days, and it was a race to the finish. And I'm not going to do that again. So
No, that's totally valid. That's
Yeah.
totally valid. So as far as so you talk a lot about, spirit and then spirit kind of giving you direction.
Mhm.
Um, what have been some messages that you've received from spirit in your dreams that have really kind of been the sail that has guided you through this journey? Because it sounds like that has really been the steering wheel of the ship and it's just been kind of full steam ahead.
Yes, so many things. I mean, just recently, about a month ago, I had a message when I woke up, and it said 3 lines. I wrote them on 3 separate lines. It said, "Set the action, metaphysical coincidences, bring participation." It's like, "Okay, So I kinda waited, and then about a week later, I started playing around with the idea of making a group for women that were authors to talk about marketing, book marketing. And I just posted it on Threads one night and it blew up. All of a sudden, all these people were like, yes, I want to join that. And I was like, okay, I haven't even really, I usually, horse before the cart. I usually would have set the whole thing up, bought the domain name, made the website before I said anything to anybody. And I was like, okay. And so all of a sudden, 90 women like rushed in and were like, I want to be part of this. The second woman that joined, her pen name was the name of one of the characters in my book.
Oh, that's the universe universing.
Mm-hmm.
I love synchronicities. I think that's so awesome.
Yep. I was like, okay, I'm on the right track. Guess this is what I'm doing now.
So do you find that like do you feel like you get more direct messages or do you feel like there's a lot of decoding involved? Because like little things like when you are like, okay, I got these messages, it seems like they're like, some guide words, and then it's like you start doing something and then it's like you see something, you're like, all right, that's confirmation. Is that typically how it
Yes, it's both because those messages I get in that transitional state, in the hypnopompic state. But if they're dreams and they come truly from that REM state, then those usually need a little bit more decoding. They're not as direct unless it's a visitation dream and somebody shows up and they're like, hey, I have to tell you something. And then it's very like different experience, very direct. You get the message. You wake up and you're like, I saw such and such last night, and they said blank. But otherwise, if it's these metaphorical story dreams, I feel like those need a little bit more reflection because they're coming from the part of your brain that works on symbols, and they need a little bit of translation once you come into this world and you're back in the 3D and your brain is, you know, uh, blocked with the ego and fear and all of these things that we live with in the 3D that we don't have to worry about when we're dreaming.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I feel like you literally read my next question straight out of my brain because I was literally going to ask you my next question. Because being that this is a paranormal kind of spooky girl podcast, I love to talk about obviously the deceased and spirits. And so, visitation, I would love to kind of pick your brain on that. Have you been visited by, whether it was your own circle, ancestors, or even maybe not necessarily for you, but have you ever been visited via dream for somebody else?
I have definitely been visited by my immediate family. My father passed away when I was younger, and just becoming an adult. And I had a clear visitation dream where he came to me and told me a bunch of things. And that was the first time that that happened. Of course, it happens a lot now, and he'll be older or younger or, all different. It's like he's living in all these different parallel realities,
It's like playing dress up.
Yeah, it's just there he is again, but now he's younger than me. And so I have a lot of those experiences, and I think that those are a different flavor of dreams. Anybody who's had visitation dreams will tell you, oh, it's not their typical story dream. It was like I was just sit in this liminal space where I passed through this, uh, dimension where they were just there, and then they spoke to me very frankly. Um, So I think those are very powerful, and I think they're completely plausible. And I also think that there's a lot of spirits in these other astral realms that are stuck because they don't really realize where they are, and they're not sure whether to go forward. They're trying to go back, or they don't know whether to go forward. And I think those may be the names that I get, because I get a lot of people's names and they're not names of people I know.
Okay. That's
So,
interesting. That's really interesting. Do you
yeah.
have any theory? Because I know I try and think back to a lot of like listener questions or even just like everyday questions that we kind of get. And one of the ones that seems to be a hot topic is I'll get, especially in mediumship, there's a lot of people who will be like, how come, my loved one has passed on, or I had a friend that passed on, and like they
Mm.
haven't come to me in a dream yet. Do you
Mm.
think there's a reason for that? Do you have a theory behind that?
I was reading a book the last night, and it was written by a medium who was saying that sometimes she tries to contact her ancestors, and sometimes they show up and sometimes they don't. And maybe it's partly because that spirit of a person is a person who's not, doesn't want to cooperate, or has moved on to some other place and they're not accessible. I think it's a combination of things. I think that it's I want to say that it's more likely if that person had a predilection for it in life, but I don't know. So, none of us know what happens after we die, but I feel like, since we are all connected in more ways than we can imagine, that we should all have the ability to have those connections or communications or experiences. And sometimes it's just a matter of asking for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So do you think that have you seen, so kind of steering a little bit off of that now and jumping around, have you seen dream sessions change people's lives? Like, have you seen, I guess, I'm sure it's hard to word some of this because it makes sense in my head, but I'm like trying to get it to, out loud. But like when you've had a client, have you kind of seen that walnut like crack open and then like have that aha moment? And I feel like a lot of us, at least what I've seen again from my own experience in mediumship, is people carry around a lot of energy baggage
Yes.
and don't necessarily know that they're doing so. And so whether that's trauma or grief or, all these just layers of things that they don't resolve or deal with, um, I just like I wonder like if this in a way is kind of like it's like a therapy, like to
It
help
is.
people kind of go into that state and kind of revisit and reclaim their power. Have you seen this change people's lives? And what's been your experience there in healing?
Absolutely. So every time there's an aha moment, and sometimes other ahas come after, right? But even in the session, there's always ahas. And that's why I call it a transformational practice, because it really does alter the way you previously perceived your dreams, as well as the way you previously perceived your reality, your perception of yourself. All of those things can start to shift when you start to work with your subconscious. And so I have seen a lot of changes. I had one client where we were doing a 90-day program, and in that we work together very closely. We do multiple sessions. We have chat support. We do a lot of visualizations. And by the end of it, she decided that she was closing up her business and going back to school, that she completely wanted to just change her whole direction.
That's amazing. That's kind of
So,
what I was looking for is like, what are some of the changes that you've seen in your
mhm,
clients? Like, things like that. Like they're kind of like, "Hey, I've been following this because it feels like I should be doing it." And then there's like actually following what your heart craves and loves and you're going to flourish in and what you're being called to.
exactly.
Okay, that's awesome. So what else do you kind of envision for yourself with this? Like, I'm sure because I feel like there's so much that you can do with this. What are some of your goals for the new year with, helping to transform people's lives? Are there any new theories, or I know you're in metaphysical studies. So is there anything that you're
Mhm.
currently learning that you're like gearing up to try some new stuff?
Yes, I'm really looking to dive into the hypnopompic state and the theories behind that, because that's what's most fascinating to me, I think, is that transitional space. So I'm probably going to be doing some extra, writing in my courses around that. But I also like the crossover between nutrition and spirituality. I think there's a lot to be done there. And I'm also really interested in like psychometry, telepathy, um, these different levels of power or energy manipulation that we can achieve in this world that people discard, like whether it's spoon bending or being able to actually manipulate objects. Because when we realize that we can do that, all of a sudden we realize that we can alter our reality, that everything isn't as set as we think it is. And so that's really what metaphysics is the study of the nature of reality. So once you start investigating all of those different aspects of it, everything starts to click into a different portal. And all of a sudden you're going down a rabbit hole of realizing that nothing is what you thought it was.
Yeah. No, and I love that you're touching upon telepathy and things like that because um I'd love to just pick your brain on that quickly because I'm sure me as so many other people you hear that it's one of those fun facts where it's like we only use like maybe 1% of our brain, and I always like it's something that just stays in the back of my head where I'm like, well, if we're only using 1%, what are we truly capable of? And
Mhm.
I haven't outside of I think I'm pretty plain Jane, and this is why I started the podcast was to kind of expand my horizons and learn from, different walks of life. But I know what I've seen in a paranormal sense, a metaphysical sense, and the things that I know that I should not know, and the things that I've seen that not a lot of people can see. And I always you have to kind of think outside the box and know that, like, if those things are possible for you, then you have to keep an open mind that there could be telekinesis, there could be telepathy, and I don't know if those are hand in hand or the same thing, but I it just has always stayed with me to be like, "Okay, what could we truly conquer if we really were able to access all of that brain power?" So, like, have you learned about what else we're capable of, if we're able to kind of amp up our brain power?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's definitely possible. And five only 5% of our brain is conscious and 95% of it is subconscious. So similarly, we're when we come into this existence, we kind of agree to a sort of amnesia, right? Where we forget about where we came from or what we really know. And our experience here is one of remembrance, where we're trying to remember, oh, I do have these powers. I have done this before. I do have these abilities. I do have more knowledge. I'm not just who I think I am.
Mhm.
And that's really the spiritual awakening path. That's really the self-discovery path. And so of course, I think that all of these things are possible. I think that everybody has the ability to have all of the clair senses, and we just aren't developing them. We aren't admitting and allowing that these things exist because as a culture, they haven't been completely endorsed. But it
Yeah.
doesn't mean they don't exist. Wi-Fi exists when you can't see it, and everybody agrees it exists. So
Yeah.
why can't all these other things exist, right? And so that's where I've always been on the fringe of opinion, is that, well, I believe in all of that you can't see, because and I actually don't need that scientific stamp on it. But now science is really starting to prove these things, and everybody is still saying, oh yeah, but I mean, we know that that all of our intelligence agencies have been using psychics for decades,
Long
but
time.
we're still disregarding them as
Oh.
being fake.
Yeah. And it's funny because so I have two things. There, I don't know if you ever watch TikTok, but there is a lot of people kind of recalling I'm probably gonna blank, it's something gate, where it was like the gate testing that they
Oh
used to do
yes.
in schools. And people are like, you know, as a child, you're not really thinking much of it. Like they're just testing you and they're, taking a peek at like special abilities. But as people have gotten older, they're like, wait a minute, that I
Mm-hmm.
remember that happening, but nobody talks about it. And like now it's starting to, like, people are starting to remember and they're kind of going, hey, like, wait a minute, and raising an eyebrow at it. So I thought that that was interesting. And I was like, okay, so people have been involved in kind of testing special abilities and what we're capable of and sensitivities. The second part, so what I wanted to say is, I thought it was really interesting that you brought up remembering, particularly because I wanted to ask you what are your thoughts on reincarnation, and how does reincarnation correlate to our dreams? And like,
Mm-hmm.
do they have a lot to do with our dreams? Like, do we sometimes dream about past lives or
Mm-hmm.
things that we've experienced? Is that part of our dreamscape?
I think it is, because when we realize that time isn't linear, that we are just in this 3D reality, we have created calendars and clocks and these things that make our world seem very regimented, and it, makes it all make sense. But that time isn't really linear, that, the theories about there is only now, and that now has multiple dimensions, that everything happening all at once, right?
Yeah.
The quantumness of all of that. So, of course, we could be existing as spiritually right now in multiple lives. When we come into this life, we say, oh, that's past. Well, it could be parallel, it could be any number of things. So yes, I think that we could be glimpsing those things. And I do think that we do reincarnate until we have achieved a certain level of wisdom, knowledge, whatever it might be, in about why we keep coming back. And I
Yeah.
think that once we start to crack open the perceptions about why we're here and who we really are, that then we move beyond that loop.
Okay.
And I think that's what's happening right now with a lot of people are calling it the Great Awakening and all this type of thing, where a lot of people's clear abilities are awakening, and a lot of people are starting to question reality. And now we have augmented reality and AI reality, and all of a sudden everything's getting destabilized, and extraterrestrial life may be presenting itself, but we can't even tell now because everything is being falsely made on the internet. We don't know what to believe. And so I think that all of this is destabilizing how we're perceiving reality, and that we do, as souls, reincarnate to this 3D world until we raise our vibration high enough to exist on another realm level.
Okay. So kind of hand in hand with that, I'm gonna get a little spooky on you.
Uh-huh.
So when it comes to what we identify as spirit or ghost, what do you think it is that we're experiencing with that? So as a paranormal investigator, when I go into a haunted location, and I'm picking up, like, I call them downloads, but like numbers, names, like mini clips of like places like I've been there before, and there's you know, things like that, and it's definitely like a download from spirit, and I can gather that. But physical things happening, like a lamp falling over that's extremely heavy and doors shutting, you know, how do you kind of identify those things? Like, what do you identify them with? Like, do you consider ghosts as ghosts, or from what you've seen and what you've experienced, is it something else?
I think that they're just energy, like we're just energy.
Yeah.
We're just moving fast at a certain vibration, and so we're having the illusion of form. But spirit is around us all the time, and they're just moving at a different vibration, so we can't see them. And they can still manipulate things in this level, because all of these objects, it's just a illusion that they're solid, right?
Okay.
So when we start to look at the physics of matter, it makes a lot more sense. And if we just baseline that everybody's a spirit, then I think that some people, like I said, get caught between realms. So they pass on, but they are not ready to, or they don't know that they did, or they have unfinished business. And so they are still dwelling a little bit closer to our energetic vibration,
Okay.
because not everybody is, right?
Yeah.
But I think that we are all just energy. And, I think it was Tesla that said that the secrets of the universe, I think he said, frequency, vibration, and resonance, something like that. So it's like we have to look at those concepts to help understand other things like
Yeah.
like ghosts.
Yeah. Now, do you think that things, because you had touched upon like extraterrestrial, so a lot of people, this is something that I never really had much of an interest in until I started this podcast, and the more that I looked into it, I was like, oh, this is actually kind of cool. Cryptids and you know, extraterrestrial life, and like just these folklore creatures, you know, why do you think when it comes to things like that, that how do I word that? Like, people say like, okay, like I, you know, came out of my farm, and there was my cattle was destroyed, and we saw this weird creature kind of lurking off into the forest, right? Are those just a different energy plane? Like, is it, have you come across that yet, where it's kind of like you've given cryptid thoughts, or you've experienced something that maybe would explain where, who, what, why, when this thing could be?
I think a lot of those things, a lot of those, like the crop circle type situations and things like that, are, well, not necessarily crop circles, because I feel like that's a different thing. But I think that there's a lot of portals in our reality, and my books talk a lot about portals. And I think there's a lot of different ways that we can cross into these other dimensions. A lot of people talk about, places in New Orleans where they just walked through a wormhole and things like that. I think that that's very possible. And so I think that there's a lot more flexibility than we think there is with the plane that we exist on. It's just not what we think it is.
Yeah.
And so anything else that a lot of people might think, oh, extraterrestrial life is preposterous. Well, I think it's preposterous to think that there isn't extraterrestrial life, because look at how large the galaxy is, and how small our planet is, and how small we are on that planet. We're like little ants in the microcosm. So
I always say look at the ocean, because I'm like, they say with that, like we've only explored what, like, it was like a really small number percentage of the ocean. Yeah. I'm like, well, like, can you imagine the forests, the ocean, space? Like we haven't even scraped the iceberg.
Right. So I think that on the alternate, it's preposterous to think that we know everything, right? That we've explored everything, that we've measured to every star. No, I mean, it's just our hubris to think that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, So I guess since we're kind of getting towards the end here, I love to always ask our guests to kind of give our listeners, some wisdom, some advice to kind of leave them with. So if there's something that you could tell our listeners, what would that be? What would that wisdom or advice be?
I would like to quote something from the end of book 2, The Dream Mirrors, and that is that be the creatrix, be the creator of your universe. Understand that you have a lot more agency in your existence than you think you do. And once you start to break down those perceptions of reality and of self, we start to get a little bit closer to how big the universe is and maybe what role we play in that.
I love that. I love that. I think that's really good advice. So another thing that I just want to ask of you before we go is tell all of our listeners where they can find your awesome books and where they can kind of keep up with your happenings and some podcasts that you're going to be on as well as your podcast. So give them all the
Yes.
deets, and we'll also make sure to post links as well.
Yes, so meganmary.com is where you can find me, and that's where my 3 books, Witches of Maple Hollow trilogy, you will find there, also on audiobook. And you will also find my online dream courses on there, and you can schedule a one-to-one session with me to go through your dreams. I also have the 90-day dream empowerment program. And I have the podcast, Women's Dream Enlightenment. And I've been on over 100 podcasts as well. So if you head over to my media page, you can see all of those interviews there as well.
Awesome. So you guys heard it here. If you have any comments, if you're watching and you want to post them down below, feel free to, and we can always get those questions over to Megan. But thank you guys so much for joining us to kick off again our first episode of season 3. And we can't wait to chat with you guys again. So as always, stay spooky and stay weird, my friends, and have a great day.